finding legendary businesses in unusual places, the hard truth about soft matters, and why good people are the only leadership decision that really matters. All right. Joey Ramone said, hey ho, let's go. Welcome, my legendary friends, to this episode of Legends and Losers, where we aspire to have authentic dialogues with amazing people about what it takes to design a legendary business and a legendary life. And, sometimes we examine critical topics like why is it that Prius drivers tend to drive so slowly in the passing lane, and how much scotch is appropriate to drink at the company party. Well, you can't get more authentic than our guest today, Tjan. He's a VC and an author of a new book titled Good People, The Only Leadership Decision That Really Matters. And man, I love this dialogue. And it was really a pleasure getting to know Tony. He's an incredibly inspiring guy. And I need to thank my dear friend and the co-author of Play Bigger, Kevin Maney, for introducing me to Tony. Kevin also was on episode 25 of Legends and Losers. If you haven't had a chance to listen to Kevin's Legends and Losers, please do. And I'm hoping to get him back soon. He's one of the smartest, most genuine, most affable, most talented, and most tolerant of my stupidity people I've ever met. Kevin Maney, I love you, and I'm not too shy to say it. All right, Tony. He is his new book, Good People, The Only Leadership Decision That Really Matters, is a very poignant one today. If you're a regular listener to Legends and Losers, you've heard me talk about the fact that there's a topic that sort of keeps showing up in my world and probably in your world too, which is what's the role of a company beyond just making profits? And Tony is a very kind of values centered guy. So let me tell you about his background. He's an entrepreneur. He's a strategic advisor and a venture investor. Before Good People, he wrote another New York Times bestseller called Heart, Smart, Guts, and Luck. He's the chief executive officer of the Q-Ball Group. And Q-Ball is a private investment and VC firm based in Boston, Massachusetts. He's also the chairman and co-founder of a retail service brand called Minilux. And prior to joining Q-Ball, he was a senior advisor to the chief executive of Thomson Reuters. And he founded the pioneering internet consulting and advisory firm Zephyr, where Tony and I actually competed against each other back in the late 1990s. He began his career at McKinsey & Company, and he also served as the vice chairman of the Parthenon Group for nearly 15 years. He holds degrees from Harvard, and he also contributes to Harvard College, and Harvard Business School. And he's also a contributor to the legendary Harvard Business Review. He serves on many boards and is an advisor to the MIT Media Lab. And now, Tony Tjan is on Legends and Losers. All right. So, hey, Tony, tell me something legendary.
Something legendary. I think there's, for me, we were just talking about where I grew up, Newfoundland, Canada, and it's a place of freaking legends, man. Like I think about growing up, and I went to a school where we used to call it about the townies and the baymen, and, just growing up there where they were just adding the 12th grade and watching, a place that went through all the highs and lows of the fishing industry, and watching those heroes just go out there every single morning and do their work. We used to say, or I used to go out and people said, hey, you've enjoyed some modicum of success. How did you do it? In spite of growing up a Newfie and in spite of growing up that place. And I used to play in that, but, I just now realize it. So much of who I am and what I'm about actually came out and about from growing up in a place that most people read about or talk about as Newfie jokes, but it's a pretty legendary place. The oldest city in North America, furthest point east, Cape Spear, absolutely gorgeous. But the most beautiful thing about it is the legendary nature of the people. I think there's a real authentic soul, and we just talked about cutting out a lot of the bullshit in this world and leadership. And I think a lot about being legendary, starting with truth. And there's just a lot of good people out there.
Every newfie I have met, I kind of find myself falling in love with them pretty quickly.
Well, I'm not talking in Newfie accent, eyes to bice to sailor.
And that newfie accent can be so strong. Sometimes I don't understand what the fuck you guys are talking about.
Well, geez, boy, because we drops our H's.
Now, do you consider it a dialect or do you just consider it an accent?
I consider it a whole fucking new language.
Yeah, for sure. And so what was it like for you growing up in Newfoundland?
Well, like you, I was, so I was overseas Chinese, happened to be born in Montreal, so we share that. And
were your parents born in China?
Yeah, no, my parents were born in Indonesia, so overseas Chinese during a period of persecution, Suharto, Sukarno era of Indonesia. Chinese were kind of like the Jews in the wrong place, and controlled a lot of the merchant trade, small percentage population that did control a lot of trade, but a minority that were persecuted. So my dad ended up, all in between, getting out of there, spending a night in jail, to finally finding his way to Canada. And I ended up being born in Montreal, but they needed a doctor in Newfoundland. So going back to legendary, I think of my dad spending nearly 50 years as one of the first surgeons there, treating people not just in the main hospitals of St. John's, Newfoundland, but all the cottage, all the small hospitals there. It was a place where you first grow up, maybe feeling, a little bit like, to what did I owe this honor, a little bit when you start reading pre-internet, pre-commercialization of the internet, I should say, that, there's the mainland and all the good stuff on the mainland, and on but and you always feel you're part of a little bit of a small town. But they say, like, Newfoundlanders, they call Newfoundland the rock. You could Newfoundlanders could leave the rock, but it's hard to get the rock out of Newfoundlanders. So I still got that in me. Still go back to my parents, still there, and it's a place where people are truly salt of the earth.
I love it, and I love the role that Newfoundland played on 9/11.
Yeah,
and I think in America and even in Canada, you tell me, I don't think Newfoundland gets anywhere near the credit that it deserves for what Newfies did on that day. Did you happen to be? Were you home on 9/11, or tell me your memory?
Well, I was in the air on 9/11, so I started my first day of work for Thomson Corporation, basically serving as an advisor to CEO on 9/11 when we lost 11 people that day, and I was moving into Ground Zero shortly after. My sister-in-law was part of the cleanup crew. My brother-in-law is a fireman from the Tribeca, going down from the Tribeca area. Doesn't talk about it much. Lost a lot of people. Know lots of people that got hurt. So I was flying over, and for my first company, we lost a spouse.
So you were flying to New York on that day?
I was flying to London. I landed in London and saw the screens. And
got it.
London. But
had you left from New York, Tony, or where did you fly out of?
I left from Boston. So
okay, yeah. But for the grace of God, go I, right? Leaving out of Boston.
And left from Boston, and know people that were meant to go on, some of those UA flights, and just got over there and was shocked with the news, and remember a gathering with a lot of people. But on the way home, we didn't make it all the way to Newfoundland. I had called some friends. They got us through the Maritimes, and I just talked to my parents and lots of friends. But there's a play in New York now on the story of what Newfoundlanders did. But
I didn't know that. What's the play called?
Yeah, I think it's let me try to pull it up. It's either Come Home Again. I haven't seen it yet, but my sister just told me it's just starting to get critical acclaim, and I think it's Come Home Again or
see if I can
try to find it.
Come From Away. Is that right? A new musical.
Come From Away, and it really That's the first time I heard of someone trying to capture this
Oh,
story.
that's cool. I didn't know that. This is awesome. It's subtitled "The Remarkable True Story of a Small Town That Welcomed the World."
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that was your first opening question. I was a little unprepared for, but it was like just like that's what I grew up with. I think so. What happened, obviously, as you know, was you know no one could fly anywhere. People were stranded, and there's a little bit of history here where back in the day when we couldn't get flights to go across the whole Atlantic, Gander Airport in Newfoundland used to be a key refueling stop, and you used to get the Sinatras of the world to all the famous people who used to try to fly across to London during the world wars. We all
It,
stopped.
it was always the spot, right?
It was the refueling stop.
Yeah.
And so what happened
And
as a
people don't
flash?
realize that, of course, because we fly around the world, not around the center of the
Exactly,
world, right? We fly
exactly.
over the world, I guess is maybe a better way. And so most people don't realize that if you're flying from New York or
Yep,
Boston or Montreal or wherever it is, you fly over Newfoundland as you go
yep,
to Europe, right?
yep. When you're headed to the continental Europe or London, people will say, you're flying over to Newfoundland towards Greenland, and I usually just joke when people say where I'm from. I said, go to Maine and make a right for a few thousand miles, and there where Titanic sank, you'll find me.
How
And
far is the Titanic off the coast of
oh, a few
Newfoundland?
hundred miles, a few hundred
Yeah,
miles. But the
yeah.
amazing story was that planes got grounded, and hundreds and hundreds of families and people got stranded. And it's a beautiful untold story. I mean, families opened up their homes, they took them in, no questions asked. And I think it's a beautiful story of the spirit of the people, and it's very personal to me too, because when we first got there, my parents told me stories of my dad was a doctor, my mom a social worker, and it used to say, like, people came over and they gave us hand me downs, and they we went over with not much at all. And when my dad did services and it was a government job there, people used to give everything from moose meat to seal flipper pie, cod au gratin, cod
Well,
tongue.
what the fuck is seal flipper pie?
It's exactly as it sounds. It's
Is
a
it
seal flipper in a pie, like a
and
savory pie.
is it tasty? What does it taste like?
Yeah, it tastes savory, man. It's like it's up there with the caribou and the moose, and yeah,
Can you are you in New York or are you in where are you?
I'm in Boston.
You're in Boston. Can you get seal flipper pie in Boston?
Now you can't really get seal flipper pie back in Newfoundland anymore either. But
Oh
what I was
wow.
going to say was, like, when my parents first went there and I just watched this, people were always generous. And what was neat, my mom has a funny story. She said someone came over after my dad something and said, hey, we gives you some beer, no? Like, the doc did some good number on me. I don't got my bloody noses now. And my mother says, we don't drink much. Oh, you don't drink so much? Like, don't worry, I gave you some beer. I'll be over there tonight. I bring over a couple cod too, just throws her in the freezer, and, throw the beer in there too. So my mom goes, we're getting, talks to my dad. They couldn't pronounce his Chinese name. It's Yongzi, and it's Engtjie. So everyone called him ET. So Dr. ET, like the movie.
Does he like being called Doctor
Oh
ET?
yeah, he loves it. And so there's a story of bringing over beer. You said you couldn't understand the accent. Mom thought she was getting, a couple cases of Molson or Labatt's Blue, Canadian brand beers, of course. But what
You
happened
don't
was,
have to tell me, Tony. I know.
okay, well,
This is a
what?
body made of Molson muscle right here.
There you go. But what she got was grizzly beer meat, not like
What
the
what
animal
what's
beer.
what is that?
It's the animal, a bear, not drinking beer, a grizzly bear.
Oh, bear, not beer.
Exactly, beer, beer, not beer.
It depends on what your definition of is, huh, Mom?
So anyhow, no, that's great. And I worked on my recent book, Good People, largely inspired by clan and community, and recognizing that so many people, especially in my formative years from there, really, really, really helped me. I mean, encouraged me to do the things I did, gave me my first jobs working behind a bar at age 13. helped me collect coins from laundry machines, doing newspaper routes, selling computers there. Teachers that just encouraged me to, push myself. And, you know, that's the stuff of, legends. And if it weren't for that, like, I think of some of the people I get to interact with today, some of the ones that, by anyone's definition would be a legend in the world of celebrity and personality. And I won't say any names, but they'd be anyone that would be iconic. But true iconicism, comes from something deeper in the soul and character. And and a lot of the people that are iconic and large have it, but everyday people, there's everyday heroes like that take people in on a 9/11, that bring you whatever food or hand-me-downs they have. It's in their natural spirit, it's in their natural hearts. And we need a little bit more of that leadership of compassion and character and values today.
And why don't you think we have as much of it as you think we should?
So, I think in the world of business, I mean, ever since Milton Friedman, as Seth Godin recently wrote, the sole purpose of business was and has originally been described as having only one singular objective, which is maximizing profits. That has led to a system of cultivating, I think, business leaders and leaders more generally as being biased to goodness as only competency, as only hard skill, as only winning or losing. And we've lost some sense of what it really means to win, because it's not that binary. We have come to assume that you can only be competitive if you're not compassionate. And we have developed leaders of great competency, and are very long on that in our business institution. As I talked with the current dean of my alma mater, Harvard Business School, he said, look, even in institutions like us, we've become very long on developing leadership of competency, but relatively short on developing leadership of character. So the short answer is we haven't promoted it. We haven't developed it. We haven't valued it. And anyone who does, we put it in this bucket that is almost like a stepchild. If someone is in the business world doing that, we want to label it like corporate social responsibility or social impact or philanthropy. We don't yet bring it together and celebrate it as, no, man, this is the way that you really create long-term advantage. This is the way you really create change. Institutional trust in the U.S. is at a frickin' 50%, okay, for business. And cultural and employee
50% of what? What does that
Only
mean?
50% of the population has any trust for business, according to the Edelman Barometer Trust. But even worse than that, 2/3 of employees for the last 10 years, 2/3 either are indifferent or want to leave their job. Cultural and employee engagement has been at a dismal 32% for the last decade. So what kind of culture are we building in business when 2/3 of people are either indifferent or just want to leave their post? It's astonishing to me.
And it's such a fucking bummer. And the reason I think it's such a bummer is because most of us spend, have a nice pull on that. I'll do the same.
Yeah.
Most of us spend more time working at work, or however you want to describe it, than we do with our families and the people that we love. And so it's an incredibly important part of our lives. And I can't stand this discussion around work-life balance. And the reason I can't stand it is it suggests that there's my life at work and my life at home, and I'm trying to balance the two things. And to me, that's just bullshit. We just have our life, and there's whatever we're doing. And if we spend all this time at work, I mean, what human being doesn't want to have some feeling of connection, some feeling of tribe, and some feeling of meaning around the work that they do?
Yeah.
And why is it we've lost that, or seem to have lost some of that?
Well, again, I think we have such a competency bias. We have lost a bias towards culture and character, because when you focus on something as concrete as like win or lose, you forget that those cultural aspects of asking yourself in an interview question, as opposed to just going through, you start asking questions just around like, What skills do you have? What's your greatest weakness? What's your greatest strengths? What are your references? You don't try to reveal the soul of someone. You try to get something to the rehearsed answers you want, right? So you don't ask something like what you just said about things like tribe and pride, like affection, respect, and pride. I ask my folks, hey, screw all these interview questions. After you just meet someone, ask yourself, did you feel a sense of affection? Did you feel a sense that there could have been mutual respect? And do you feel a sense of pride? Screw the rest of it, right? Like, and then you start thinking, well, if that's what I'm trying to find and reveal, like, screw the normal interview process. Because what's the normal interview process? What's your greatest weakness? Well, there's only 3 fucking answers to that. You know what they are? Oh, I work
I
too hard.
work too hard.
Some people say I'm too detail oriented, and the freaking hallmark card of it all, I care too much. So it's a third, a third, a third. That doesn't.
How come nobody says, hey, my biggest weakness, I'm a 49-year-old dyslexic, bald dude who doesn't give a fuck, and generally I'm lazy.
Yeah, and you don't really get a sense of like who the person is, and it wouldn't be a question if you're trying to date someone, right? I'm not sure like one of your top 3 questions, if you're trying to engender some sort of connectivity and chemistry. Hey, just before we get started, tell me what your greatest weakness is. It's so odd.
You also used a word just a moment ago, Tony, that I find interesting in a business context. You used the word affection.
Yeah, I also used love.
Yeah, so why do you talk that way in a business? What do you mean affection? That in California, there are people who've been prosecuted for sexual harassment for the way they look at somebody. So what do you mean we need to be affectionate? What does that mean?
I think that it's what you said, like, between work and home or work-life balance. I just think that our goal, or one of our goals, should be, if you think about it, there's only two sides, right? It's the time you spend with yourself and the time you spend with other people. And wherever those other people are, you want to surround yourself with good people. You always want to have positive imprinting on you. To have positive imprinting, you need to have some baseline of collegial affection. When I use that word affection, you have to feel that there's some level of care, that this person has a level of care, or you're willing to have a level of care for them. And, where does that come from? Well, it comes from having a baseline of chemistry. It's been proven unquestionably. If you just are trying to put in a mentorship program in a company, mentorship actually causes negative to neutral at best results if there's no baseline of a relationship or chemistry. You can't really mentor someone if you're just checking the boxes. So why have we come to low engagement?
In that case, doesn't it feel more like the cops, right? It's like, well, you're not my mentor. You're here like checking up on me.
Yeah.
If I don't have a relationship with you, right, I can feel threatened, as opposed to feel like, oh, Tony's really on my side, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Look, one of the renowned management gurus, Ken Blanchard, and Gary Ridge, one of his students who runs WD-40, which is amazing in that they have about 98% employee engagement. They've written something that I love, that statement, like, don't just mark my paper, help me get the A, right? So that's the issue that we have. We've become procedural. We've become standard operating procedure. We SOPs. We want to check the boxes so that when someone doesn't have a seat on a plane, or we just assume that it's okay to drag some poor bastard off, and just that's what our book says. We get security. We just pull them off, and that's what happens. And we've lost the humanity because we have thought that the best way to scale and create value is taking actually the humanity out of it, is giving rules, guidelines, and compliance. And of course we need competency, of course we need compliance, but we can't do it at the expense of character, values, and culture. The two are not mutually exclusive.
It's just so interesting to me, Tony, because it seems like everywhere I go now, I'm around people who want to have conversations about what is the role of companies or businesses in our world today. Because whether you want to look at it from a personal side, which is huge, the sort of increasing bifurcation of incomes and salaries and incentives and total comp from the top folks to the bottom folks that has materially changed over the last 30 or 40 years. Then there's the whole environmental discussion. There's a lot of things you could say. What's the role of an enterprise in the world? And what's cool to me is, at least, and you tell me where things are at, because this is a strange conversation, I think, to have with, I don't know if you call yourself a venture capitalist, we'll get to that in a sec, but that as an investor and as a company builder and entrepreneur, that you're having a conversation around, what not that long ago people would just call the mushy, airy-fairy, bullshitty, West Coasty crapola. And, can we get back to talking about margins and EBITDA, please?
Yeah, well, I'm not even sure the West Coast has it right. I mean, I think that there's a lot. You don't build culture just with foosball tables and colorful beanbag chairs, and the authenticity is something. I mean, look, you got your share of things happening in Silicon Valley right now, including the most valued private company, in Uber. So I think that. Authenticity will never go out of fashion. I promise you that, Chris. And I promise you that the companies that have the strongest long-term competitive advantage, they take a long view. They're very authentic. They have a care and respect for their colleagues. I'm proud of the fact. I mean, the partner I've known the longest in my firm is 30 years. The one that I've known the least is 16. Okay. I mean, I just don't think it has to be a way where people are churning and have to be in 5 positions in 6 years. I think we have to remember that people need competency. They need the extrinsic reward. But the greatest competitive advantage is when you deliver to someone intrinsic, meaning you help people have a higher expression of themselves. You will get the best out of them, and you will get great value creation. I am a capitalist in every sense of the word, but I do believe that the way to create value is not to place profit as the sole purpose. You need to, as Mats Lederhaus, my partner, says, you got to put purpose before product and product before profit. Purpose before product and product before profit. That is how, roll your eyes there. I got to say it, your purpose.
No, I'm letting it settle into my brain.
Then the profit. And that is what, creates value. Financial results are the byproduct of something else. And anyone can be able, we kind of also define success just monetarily. Well, it's much easier to, do value capture than real long-term value creation. So much of the success, you say, why have we gone that way? Because we measure people's success people are brilliant if they've managed to just capture value in a sub-second window, almost like a quant trader. Well, I don't think that's the role of business. I think the role of business is to, obviously, besides creating value for all shareholders, you got to turn something back to those stakeholders, your employees, your client base, and the society that supported you. You just got to.
And so how do you think about doing that when, I got to believe, your charter is ultimately shareholder or investor returns, right?
Well, obviously that's a business purpose, but one of the things that stops people from doing this is the cognitive bias and the business bias we have in time frame. So the first thing I've done, at least in my fund structure, is to eliminate a time frame. I think that if you're trying to do this in a short term, it ain't going to happen. So what do I mean?
So there, in Silicon Valley, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, the venture funds are typically 10 years, and then they have the option to extend them to, some go to 15 or whatever, 12 or 13, whatever it is. That's not the case. You don't. If I'm an investor,
well, we just set a permanent capital pool, perpetual capital, and I figure that I learned in Newfoundland that the best thing to do is just to learn from someone smarter than you, and it seemed that Warren Buffett kind of figured this out, that having a permanent capital pool, we want to try to be a Berkshire Hathaway of venture capital and use early growth to create durable growth and build our moats around companies. I want simple long-term compounding. I mean, just capturing value in a narrow window, that's nice, but I want the stuff that that lasts. I mean, I mean, what if we create if someone like, does something and some other guy, puts up a greater value and someone walks away with 50, 100 million? Well, that to me is risk transfer. That's not real value creation.
Right. Well, and the weird thing is, and I'm just seeing if I can dig it out as we're talking. There was a story recently. Let me see where it was, about the fact that there really are no great new tech companies anymore. That everybody ends up getting acquired. Yeah, here it is. So it was on Vox.com. The headline of the article is "The End of the Internet Startup. We haven't had a major new technology company in more than 10 years." And the story goes on to talk about how, companies are selling out and very few tech companies want to go public anymore. And so this notion of enduring value is kind of an interesting one. Do you think we're just too short-term focused? Is that what you're saying?
I think we have long-term problems to solve and long-term issues and short-term timeframes. Absolutely. I think that you could take, I mean, it's part of the American culture. It's part of the plastic surgery. It's part of the Botox. It's part of the diets. It's part of our election cycle of 4 years. It's like, if you want to solve real big problems, it ain't about, iterate and fail fast. It's about sticking to it. It's about having a long view. It's about just ignoring the ebbs and flows, and trying to solve real big problems. Two people out of MIT, Jason Ponton, the most recent editor of the MIT Tech Review, and Nicholas Negroponte, the co-founder of the MIT Media Lab, have
Two
stated,
very big thinkers. Yep.
yeah, and both stated much more eloquently than me. Like, we have stopped trying to solve big problems. I mean, he said, like, the great thing of a great legend out of MIT, Marvin Minsky, who passed away last year, one of the fathers of artificial intelligence, was he wanted to solve big problems, and he would say, iterative product development and failing fast, well, that's a freaking stupid idea. If you are really trying to solve something big, you got to stick with it. You got to be patient. You're not trying to, just A/B test the heck out of everything. And I think the truth's in between, but real tough problems like trying to, have people live on the planet Mars, or like, or solve world hunger, or change an industry. One of the ones we're trying to do at our firm Q-Ball is transform the entire nail care indry, where people get
I have that on my list. You started a nail company. I was like, what?
Yeah,
Okay.
that stuff that shit takes time.
So why don't we go there? You started a nail salon business, right?
Yeah.
Now, at least in my part of the world, there doesn't seem to be any shortage of nail salons. So I think there's a coverage thing that, at least in Northern California, appears to be just fine. So what are you doing in nail salon innovation, Tony?
Well, there's about 400,000 largely women employed in this industry. There are about 65,000 points of presence to get your nails done across the U.S. And on a reported basis,
so 400,000 people and 50,000.
60,
excuse me.
65,000. Probably half of those are formal nail salons. Probably half are, within hair salons and hotels. And then you have, an industry that is 8-9 billion reported, probably about 12 billion to 14 billion if you include the informal economy of cash. But Sarah Maslin-Nair 2 years ago, the New York Times writer, did a big expose. It was one of the largest pieces of investigative journalism by the New York Times. 14-page, 15-page expose over 2 days, front page of New York Times, on the deplorable conditions happening in nail salons, human trafficking, toxic chemicals,
What? What do you mean? How? Explain.
Well, it's the most used beauty service in the world that's the most underregulated. So people use chemicals to paint on people's nails that are the equivalent of auto paint. There's a nail service called acrylics, where people are literally gluing, and so therefore you're sniffing glue through the day without proper ventilation. Many of the nail color products are carcinogens or chemicals that are very dangerous to your nervous system. microbacteria that grows in hot whirlpool tubs that causes nail fungus, Hep C, just circulating
You're beginning
bacteria.
to sound like the end of every drug ad on TV. You know, it's like, well,
Yeah,
it may cause death, and like this
and it
sounds like
does,
a
and it does,
horrible. How is this even possible? That I mean, there's 65,000 of these places that
yeah,
are people are
it's
working in a
we just
toxic.
close a
And what
blind
about the
eye.
customers too? I mean, when my wife goes and gets this shit done, does she have toxic bullshit on her hand now?
Well, not only that, but like, there's greater than 70% chance she's supporting an industry and trade that is to me, I put it up there with all those things we learn. Like there's terms now of blood diamonds and like fast fashion, what Andrew Morgan has written about in
Yep.
the high cost of fashion, and cotton farmers who commit suicide, and all the workers in Bangladesh that suffer at low cost. This is an industry that has exploited a lot of immigrants. So a decade ago, about 8 years
But do
before that,
consumers know this? I mean, this is the first time I've ever heard
I
it.
think largely
Obviously,
a
I
lot
don't.
of women know, but I think we close a blind eye. We want to get a moment of beauty that is cheap. But about 10 years ago, we said, look, there's a chance to be purposeful. There's a chance to hit a trend on tech-enabled retail. So we did everything from putting in a POS to using big data. It turns out that you can predict supply and demand on a warmer day. More people are meant to get a mani or a pedi. Hotter climates like in LA or Dallas, more open-toe shoes. Seasonality with things like bridal season or spring break. You could predict things. It turns out that color is very emotional and could be data driven. But most important, that this is not an industry just of frivolous beauty. It's very emotional. I never really got this until, one day in one of our Mini Lux studios, there was a woman there, and I went up to her. I said, "Hey, my name's Tony Tjan. I'm chairman, co-founder of Mini Lux." And she said, "Oh my God, it's nice to meet you." And she started kind of shaking, and she almost started crying. And I said, what's going on? She goes, "It's my first manicure." And I said, "Wow, like, I'm just kind of like, hey, that's cool, like that's kind of cool, like get a little bit of beauty, like it's a cool thing." She goes, "No, you don't understand. It's my first manicure." I said, "Okay, well, why'd you pick Mini Lux?" She goes, "Well, you know, I just really needed a moment today." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "I'm a single mom. I've got one of my first job interviews in a long time. I just need a moment of confidence. Thank you." And I finally got it at that moment that what we're about is so much more than just giving a moment of beauty. There are these 400,000 purveyors that we have kind of relegated in society to say that all they are the bottom of the totem pole of beauty services. They're just there painting nails. It's a moment of cupcake. It's a moment of frivolous, like you know, frivolous like beauty porn for someone. And I didn't really understand that our real purpose, our real calling, was to deliver self-care, self-confidence, a moment of self-expression, of self-respect. That you are actually making people feel a moment of yay, of betterment for themselves, and not just for the client, but for our people. And if we can do that in a way that's about fair beauty, if we can educate and be part of a movement of conscious consumerism, then I don't think that I'm not doing something just from a philanthropy side. I'm starbucking the frickin' nail salon. That's what I want to do. And I don't think Howard Schultz did that for a socialist cause or a philanthropic cause. I think he was a damn frickin' smart business person, and created Starbucks by just trying to create a higher standard, and a higher standard, not just consistency for the consumer, but redefining that experience for the employee and making them feel like an artisan. I don't call my nail technicians nail technicians. They're nail designers, okay? They're nail designers that come in, that can move all the way to a master nail designer, a technical nail designer. They can go talk language like tall, skim, latte, oval, rounded, squoval, short, medium, long. They can go and talk about every technical aspect of your nail like it is a work of art. And believe you me, I will say it on Legends and Losers. We will be part of the movement. Whether we make it or not, we are going to be part of the movement to elevate nails to a language of fashion, a language of that is part of the current pop culture of new meaning, just like Starbucks created a new third place, a new moment of break. We're going to do it. And we're using technology, big data, design, and it's going to happen. And that type of
Wow.
big shit thinking, it takes freaking time. It's not going to happen in 7 years. I'm going to try to change an industry over the next 30 years, and we'll see what happens.
First of all, I had no idea about that industry. I mean, completely oblivious. And the other thing I love about what you're saying is obviously you're driven by a desire to make life better for the people who work in the industry and the customers. I'm going to now talk to Carrie about whether or not she's got toxic shit on her fingers. And the other thing I got to say I love is it just shows that no matter what the category is, if there's an opportunity for innovation, and there often is, and there's an opportunity to either create a new category or redesign the existing category. And so, if you'd sort of said to me before knowing you, hey, there's a Starbucks opportunity in nail salons, and in so doing, you're going to transform human trafficking and make a huge difference in wages and make a huge difference in well-being because of the toxic environment, et cetera, et cetera. That's an extraordinary thing, Tony. And how does a dude stumble onto this? Like, how did you discover this?
So my partner, John, I put out a mandate to my team, what's out there that's Starbuckable. We were kind of studying mega trends. I'd come off of a stint. My other founding partner had run Thomson, a very major Canadian company. We had led the transformation of what became Thomson Reuters, one of the largest media transformations in history. And, we just said, what's out there that could be highly transformative, game-changing in an industry? In the consumer side, what could be Starbuckable? And my business partner, John, was driving up and down the neighborhoods and said, I don't know a thing about these, but I'm telling you, there's a nail salon on every corner. And as a landlord and owner of real estate, why is it that I always turn them down? And I think Charlie Munger, one of the greatest investors, has taught a great lesson, which is always invert, right? Invert, invert, invert. Warren Buffett, right? Like, let's not go to where all the investors are in New York. Let's go in Omaha. Let's go after prosaic and mundane. And let's just go and do shit that, no one's going to think about. And look, dude, I grew up in Newfoundland. We're very simple, basic folk, right? It's like my other business.
Eyes the buy that builds the boat.
Eyes to buy the sailor. So, it took an Italian immigrant, a guy who was a former plumber out of West Roxbury that ended up being a newspaper leader that turned Thomson into Thomson Reuters, and a newfie who got into Harvard because they didn't have one of me overseas Chinese Newfoundlanders at Harvard. I was a good quota kid. So, I think just trying to invert and apply our learnings in a place where people aren't really doing it, understanding that why aren't people doing this? Well, one, the investment world is largely male dominated. Look at how you reacted when I said nail salons, right? Like
Clueless.
With all due respect, you're like a dude reaction. Like,
no, of course.
What the fuck? Like, do people know this? And then even the largely women population who use this and consume the service don't yet have a consciousness about it. And even worse is like guys who are with women partners, when the women go, they view it as a moment of frivolity. And it's almost as if we make women who go to this feel like they need to ask for permission. And
you mean the men do?
Yeah, I think our society does. Okay, the culture of society is like, this is a frivolous moment that they feel guilty. It's a guilty luxury, right?
That's at least in my life. I mean,
yeah, but
my
you can
wife
afford it.
That's true. That's true. I mean, it's just a fun thing she does. She always tries to go with girlfriends if she can. Sometimes she tries to drag me. I think I've been once.
Yeah.
But for both Manny Petty. But it's a thing she looks forward to, and she goes and she does. And she, I think she goes to the same place all the time. So she has like a relationship, like, I don't go to a barber anymore, but like a male might have with a barber or something like that. So it's something she looks forward to, and she always comes home and shows them to me. Same thing she does with, her hair designer or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing. I think it's something she looks forward to.
Well, and I think that's just it. I think, look, there's very few people that we allow to touch us, doctor, a lover, a partner, a hairstylist. There's a very emotional, tactile component there. But the real crux of this is that it's not a guilty pleasure. What it is, it's a true moment of self-care. And I think that's what we need for all of us. We need to take in moments of self-care. And I think women are better at doing this, but they feel guilty for doing it. I talked to, it was funny when I was starting this, the television personality, Susie Orman, talked to me on it. And she goes, Tony, it just so resonates with me. And I said, why? And she goes, it reminds me of the oxygen mask sign that comes down in an airplane. I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, when they make that announcement, like, in the airplane when you're taking off, like, should we have a loss of oxygen pressure? Please, before helping others, put that mask on for yourself. That message ain't for men. It's for women. Okay. Men are there like, give me that freaking oxygen mask. Like, I got it. Women are about pleasing other people first. And they feel a guilty pleasure in doing this. We need to give self-care. And, we're proud of delivering over 1 million of these services, having a couple of dozen locations. But Minilux is just one of those things that I think if you have a long-term vision, you can apply innovation to, you can be purpose-driven, bring back humanity and soulfulness into the venture world in a way that's not viewed philanthropically. I mean, let's use some numbers here. I mean, at our best locations, our sales per square feet exceed a Neiman Marcus, okay? We have,
wow. So this is a
have,
no bullshit business you're building.
Yeah, I mean, like we have.
What are you calling this new category, Tony?
Well, our business is called Minilux.
Yeah. And what do you call the new? It's obviously not a. Do you call it a nail salon, or what do you call Minilux?
No, we call them studios. We think the whole industry is like it's the fast casual equivalent in the retail services space and beauty services space. So just like in the food space, you had quick service retail, like for the fast foods, and you had fine dining. This whole fast casual category that came about with the Sweet Greens and Chipotle's. This is in the category. This is a lifestyle play. This is like a Soul Cycle, a Sweet Green. This is about delivering a moment of self-care, self-respect, self-empowerment, self-expression. And this is what's happening. And we need more of that. We need to make people feel better.
Well, and if I could be so bold, who the fuck am I to tell you anything? But this is a new category, and I think you should call it something. I think you should tell people, what category design fundamentally is about, of course, is framing a problem.
Right.
And evangelizing. That's right. Somebody wrote that shit down, right?
Play bigger.
I
got to play bigger.
I think it's time to play bigger, Tony, in the nail space.
I know where you're going. I read
okay, well, then I don't have to tell you. And by the way, if you want to schedule some time with me, and you know what the fuck, I'll just volunteer Kevin too if you want.
Yeah.
We'll get on.
I heard you guys built a consulting business around that. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if he told you, I retired when the book came out.
I know. You did tell me.
But I'd be happy to get on a call with you and him if you like, and
you wrote the book, man.
And brainstorm about it. I'd be happy to. You've gotten me all frothed up now about Minilux.
Let's do it.
So, what are the other areas you're excited about and investing in?
Well, again, I think, you're trying to solve big problems that have a long-term scale, because that allows us to have a structural advantage. The second is where, there's a huge people component, because we're so.
I hate to interrupt you, but what do you mean by a structural advantage?
In our fund, because we don't have any life on our fund, like you mentioned earlier, like most venture funds are 10 years, 2-year extension, maybe a 5-year. Because we don't have any set time frame, we have a built-in structural advantage that we have patient capital that's not trying to liquidate in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. So that just allows us to play, and look where others are not looking. It's hard for us to out Greylock a Greylock or out Andreessen and out Andreessen, but I'd say that in certain areas it'd be hard for them to out cue ball a cue ball. And
why did you name the firm Cue Ball? It's such a name that stands out in your world.
Yeah, I think, I love the symbolism of something that was, simple, sophisticated from a physical appearance, understated elegance, lead and break the pack. From a physics standpoint, it's a momentum driver. But that's a lot of bullshit from the fact I own the fucking domain name.
Well, I like all of it, including the declaration of bullshit at the end. Now, if we could for a second, I've been dying to go back in time with you. What year did you start Zephyr?
Oh, so Zephyr was, one of the first efforts to take advantage of commercialization of internet. So I did that with, my dear friend who passed way too young, coming in around 1996. We started that to be one of the first large scale web development, web application firms, when there was just less than 10,000 websites in the world.
Now, do you know that you and I were competitors back then?
Sure, I do. Yeah, yeah.
It was a hell of a run back then, wasn't it? I mean, it was Zephyr, Sapient, US Web, of course, trying to do that
IXL,
whole roll thing.
IXL,
IXL,
Razorfish.
Razorfish, of course, Scient, where I was at.
Yeah, Scient, Viant.
Viant. Um, talk about a new category. At Scient, if I remember right, within 3 years of founding, we were over 2,000 people, publicly traded, and had a $9 billion market cap in March of
Yeah,
2000.
you guys captured a hell of a lot more value than me. I mean,
Well, yeah, but here's what we didn't do, or I didn't do. I was going to leave Scient in July of 2000. And of course, had I left, I would have sold everything. And I had I had two worst case scenarios for our net worth at the time. One was a worst case scenario with the stock at 40, and the
yeah.
second, the worst case scenario, was the stock at 20. And I think I sold most of my Scient stock at about $3 or $4 a share.
Yeah.
I
Well, you
mean, it was
exceeded your expectations. Congratulations.
yeah, right. It is a mind fucking thing, and this is something I think a lot of people don't talk about. I'd be curious as to your take too. When on paper you are worth, and I had a very similar upbringing to yours in terms of the modesty around it. Let me put it that way. And so, for a kid who grew up, delivering newspapers, to be worth what I was worth on paper was a mind blowing thing. And then for virtually all of it to go away so quickly. Of course, it was quote unquote made very quickly. What was that like for you to go from if you'll allow me, legend to loser, or have such a huge change so quickly on the upside and then on the downside? I mean, it was all over and done in 5 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, we like Scient and Viant and all the rest of the clan you mentioned, grew very quickly, over 5 years to well over 125 million of revenue. We were privately held. For first few years, very profitable, but then, listening to everyone out there, just grow, take this thing public. And I had the good fortune. I can tell you when the .com crash started, because the 3 months before I was doing my IPO roadshow and I was taking my company public on the day of the .com crash, NASDAQ had lost 35% of its value and it had its largest drop that April 11th, when we were going out in 2000. And I think there's a few differences, I guess. Well, one, I was the founder, and so that was very emotional. I think the first thing going through my head was embarrassment of just needing to go back and speak to hundreds and hundreds of people. Like it's kind of like I guess people who are in these championship playoffs, you pre-print the Super Bowl winning hats. So we had all the
you had to
IP
burn the
photos.
hats, right? I had to
Yeah,
burn
you got all
mine
the
too.
hats, you got the paraphernalia ready to go, and you're coming back and you're suddenly talking about laying off people. And the only saving grace was that we eventually found a home through NEC, albeit on a much more distressed value. And the company then just continued over the next couple of decades in a different format as Nateo Partners. But it was a very hard thing to watch that whole process, watch your child get adopted, and go through 3 rounds of layoffs. And I think for me, at first, it was a very, very dark and black place. You got very depressed. But I think it goes back to some of the earlier comments I had.
Well, I hate to interrupt you, but I just had this dialogue with another entrepreneur about depression.
Yeah.
And about kind of the emotional psyche of people in business and in entrepreneurs, and how we never kind of talk about this. And, you and I were talking earlier about, you mentioned love and affection and so forth. And so could you unpack for me a little about your depression? Do you mind?
Yeah, I mean, it was depressing because you go through, and as you and a lot of people know, you go through this S1 filing, and as part of it, when you're going public, there's this whole friends and family category. Well,
Yep.
I never knew I had so many friends or family.
Right. All of a sudden, it's very large.
It's all very large, and
everybody wants that stock.
And I said, I wrote something back in the day. There was a publication I used to write every month for the Red Herring. And I said, look,
which was an amazing publication back in its time, wasn't it?
It was. And I said, like, well, shit, when it rains, it seems like a lot of worms come out. And, but suddenly how quick people are to turn media, those supposed friends and family. And, I think it was because we were defining so much through these extrinsic metrics of success. And so much of the Valley and tech world has continued this. We don't really define success by what change we've made, what profound change we have helped on people to help them raise a higher inner expression of their inner selves. What profound change have we done to realize our calling? Instead, we do a lot based on success becomes a fundraising round or PR. And it's even not really about P&L, about profit. So, for me, I had defined so much of success by capturing that moment of value. I just lost perspective and didn't have the right mentors and had some support, but not a full enough support network. And so it was a real tough time. I mean, across that, just while Zephyr was crossing, I mean, I was just then hopping into the following year into Thompson. 9/11 hit. My brother was diagnosed with, very, very rare form of cancer, given very low probability of making it through. And meanwhile, I was meant to get married and move to a new house. And they say that like changing jobs or getting married or getting a job are the 3 most biggest thing. Well, I decided to do a trifecta of that, throw in a sibling getting cancer and 9/11. And a company going through hell that I founded. It was a pretty crappy time. But I think the thing that,
how did things end up evolving for your brother?
he did. It was a tough, tough, long battle. 16, what was it? Probably 16 rounds of chemo, 3 major surgeries, and has made it out on the other end. Is doing a great business over there in Canada.
Where does he live?
Mindful snacks, authentic, healthy snacks in the corporations. He lives in Toronto.
Oh, that's great.
For me, that's the stuff that gives perspective. It was family. Yeah. It was understanding that there was a bigger purpose to these things, and eventually learning that what am I to complain about? Here I am, a kid who grew up in a fairly small town, who was given the opportunity of a lifetime, and thank God I learned this early. Like they say, like failure is great. It brings great lessons. I just say, like, if you ever get the chance to fail, just fail early in your career, and it will just do so much for you. And that just gave me strength, to not to use a cheesy metaphor, but get back up on the horse and just move on, press on, man. Like, who am I to feel sorry for myself? Like this was a aberration. It was a gift. Like, what learnings I got but it's still take a company public, grow a company to 125 million, get 1,000 people or so, while I was 25, 26.
Yeah. I know. It was an incredible time, and that's it. The end of part 1. Now, please turn the tape over, press play, and strap yourself in for part 2.